R2 after. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'll call the meeting to order, and then we'll do roll call.
Commissioner Alshire,
Present.
Commissioner Maynard,
Here.
Commissioner Behrens,
Here.
Commissioner Hughes, Commissioner Hoffman,
Here.
Commissioner Magley,
Yeah.
Commissioner Wilkins, Commissioner Borman.
Yes.
All right, with that, we'll stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item we have up is the review and approval of prior meeting minutes. The meeting minutes were from the February 22nd meeting of this year. Do we have any comments or anything from the 22nd of February meeting minutes? We have approval of the meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as noted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? All right, that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is the public hearing for the rezoning request for 404 South Jenkins. This rezoning request is to rezone from R1 to R2, is that correct?
Possibly R3.
R3.
Lynn and I were discussing that, board meeting.
Do we have
Let's see
a,
what we're hearing.
oh, so we need a minute?
During the discussion, we can see what you guys think that it should be.
Okay, so,
The original request was for R2, but in looking at our code, I had thought since R3 is directly across the street, that it would be more acceptable to do the R3 plus apartment houses are specifically mentioned in
R3?
R3, and the duplex is more of a,
R2.
is R2, but there's the two-sided home, whereas this is gonna be two levels. So that's why I did ask him to consider R3, so it's gonna be up to the commission. I believe that Sam is fine with R2 or R3, just as long as,
You can do what you need to do.
yeah.
So R3 is normally apartment, R2 is normally a duplex, traditional side-by-side, and then how many apartments or residents would be in this one? Would it be just a two,
B2.
but one above the other, so that's where the discrepancy is? So,
R2 is not duplex, it's dwelling two-family,
two-family dwelling, sorry,
and that includes duplexes,
yeah.
but it doesn't disclude stacking, or what we would consider apartments, as
Okay.
long as there's 2 units, each intended to be self-sufficient.
Okay. Did you say we already had an R3 zoned in that area?
Catty corner.
Catty corner
Catty
across
corner
it.
from it.
Well, and just north is,
North is R2,
yes,
zoned R2, just north of this lot.
so this would be not just a lot out in the middle of nowhere, it would be an extension of an existing District R2.
Well, it is so, I mean, we can open it for, it's obviously a public hearing. If Sam has anything to say, I mean, you guys are the only ones here, so I think.
Well,
Do you
all
have any
I was after was, the space was already in the house, it has hardwood floor already, and it was a matter of making it legal to separate. Big house. Our options are basically to rehab the house into a single-family dwelling, which will probably have 6 bedrooms, or split it up into 2 3-bedroom places, or, as you see the plan on the top, it's
3 bedroom,
only
2 bedroom.
2 bedrooms upstairs and 3 down.
Can you split it in a way that there's a separate entrance to the outside?
I will get the permits for that after the decision is made that I can do it.
Okay.
Yes, the key is the back porch is where the entrance could be put in. And if you look at that house, it's been added on to over and over. There was a
You mean
garage
letters
back,
in-
there was a double car garage back there, the concrete pad is still there.
Okay.
We took the building off.
I have a question. Our building code exempts single family from certain requirements that I don't think Columbia does, like sprinklers.
Correct.
I don't know how it does on duplex, it's been so long since.
They'll have to put a firewall between the top and bottom floors,
Yeah.
for sure.
You'll have to rate between
Yeah.
the two entities.
Yeah.
But they probably have to do most of that for apartment building.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay, so that's, you aware that when you start having more than one unit, you have
Yeah.
all sorts of extra building codes.
And I'll work with the city, or the county inspectors on exactly what they're gonna require on that. Whether that wall goes as sheet rock downstairs, or whether it goes as something on the floor upstairs.
Oh, I don't know about that.
R3 requires sprinklers, right? In our building code, R2 does not, R1 and R2?
Typically, you get R3, you'll get definitely sprinklers.
Right.
So,
Is there, I mean, is that even a concern if it goes to R2, considering it's only a two-family residence then, since it's not?
That's sort of what I was asking.
Yeah, so it's not even a,
if Sam's okay with R2 and we're just extending it down one lot farther, that would be my recommendation, to stay R2,
Yeah.
just make life a lot easier and less costly for Sam in the long run.
Because with R3, I mean, there's a requirement for
Yeah.
sprinklers.
I personally would suggest we could recommend R2 instead of R3. If Sam's okay with it, because R3 brings in a lot of other uses that are not residential, like, well, bed and breakfast, but boarding houses, fraternity houses, nursing homes, non-commercial parking lots, charitable buildings, private clubs, private schools, hotels. There's just a lot of stuff that really doesn't need to be in that particular part of town. I don't know the history of the apartment across the street. It goes back a long way. It was that way when I came in '85, so.
It was the old library, wasn't it, at one time?
No, it's a church.
Old church, yeah.
And it hasn't aged well.
so, did you have anything else to add to it, Sam?
No, again, well, I'm listening to Lynn about all the details. Those I don't know yet.
Right,
At this point, I was just looking to see what can I do.
right, okay. So, then as far as we're concerned, I can bring it back to our decision here. We would recommend an R2. Is there anybody is that what we would recommend, if we move to R2? Can we do that? I mean, because
Yeah.
was it applied to
The
R3?
original application was R2.
Was R2, okay,
We
so the original was
advertised
R2.
for R3, but that's an even more extensive zone district, and we have nobody here disagreeing even with that, so I would think that R2 would be acceptable. And if
Yeah.
there's any concerns, have you advertised for this to go before the board yet?
Yes.
And it's advertised as R3?
There's-
Yes, I did.
Did the ad appeared already?
It was in the original ad, yeah.
Okay.
I listed both public hearings in the same ad.
Well, maybe in covering tonight's meeting, James will see fit to note the change. Thank you, James.
Decommission settled on R2.
Yes.
I would move that we recommend to the Board of Aldermen that the property under discussion be rezoned as R2, two-family dwelling.
So you're making a motion to that?
Second.
All those in favor for R2 family dwelling in?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? All right, then we recommend R2 going forward. See if we can get that through.
Recommend to Sam that he double check with the county inspector to see what else he might need that he wouldn't need if he was just doing a single-family house.
Okay. Is there anything else on this topic then? Closed on this subject? All right. That settles the public hearing portion of this for the rezoning. Our next topic is the discussion involving the chapter 30.1 subdivision of Blaine, is that correct? Correct. You guys are more than welcome to stay if you can.
Well, I was gonna listen a few more minutes.
All right. It might be interesting. So, what do we have on the subdivision of land? Because I am not.
Okay.
The first one had it where it's 5 years and we want to reduce it.
Right, so currently, a developer has 5 years from the time they submit the, no, sorry, my brain is left me.
Final plat,
Not the final, the
preliminary
plat,
plat.
the preliminary plat, they have 5 years to develop the property before submitting for the final plat. Yes, so we are suggesting to you to consider to change that from 5 years to 2 years. It seems to be, our city attorney had asked around, and it seems to be an average time.
I was going to ask the same question. So that would be in line with like other
cities and
cities around us?
Well, with the
So,
way things are changing, I think it's a good idea to shorten it down anyhow.
yeah.
I don't think it's a good idea to change it, because look at all the subdivisions that have been done in the last 15 or 20 years. None of them have been completed within 5 years. All of them have gone much longer than that.
Does it mean they have to complete the subdivision or start the subdivision? What,
They have 5
Start.
years to submit the final
or the
plat.
final plat to start the subdivision?
I mean, if you look at Southwest Country Estates, it was started in about 2006, 2007, I forget exactly. It didn't get completed until a few years ago. The final plat was done. I mean, there was, I don't remember whether there were 6, I think there were 7 plats on that. And they only did a few lots at a time because that's what they wanted, were trying to sell. We did have a recession in there that halted construction for quite a while.
I think it was 3 separate final plats on that area.
So it's,
There were 6 or 7.
so there were
On
7
the whole.
plats, but each plat would stand on its own.
Each plat stands on its own, yes.
So
But they
that's,
were all based upon one preliminary plat.
From the city standpoint, when a preliminary plat is put in, but nothing's done with it, it makes it very difficult to budget for those items. So if we have a plat that's hanging out there, I understand we wanna be developer friendly, but what harm is there in resubmitting the preliminary if they don't have it done within the 2 years? I'm asking.
Time and
because
expense.
I don't know. But there's time
They've
and
gone through it
expense.
once.
There's time and expense on the city side as well, especially if our ordinances change.
Well, then find some other way to change the ordinance that doesn't take away the right to keep the preliminary plat in place. There are other ways of doing that.
have we ran into an issue that we can, have we ran into an issue with it being in the 5 years it's caused, anything?
At least twice.
At least twice detrimental to the city?
The most current that I'm aware of since I've started in this position is with, the Mystic Ridge and North Point. Now granted, North Point, it hasn't been out there for that long, so I shouldn't include that in it, but, like with Mystic Ridge, that one was fairly old. We're gonna need 19 transformers to develop the preliminary plat that they're, pulling into that one, and, they are considerably more expensive now than they were, and we're looking at.
So that's a good point, because the supply chain cost of product with the, increasing costs and supplies of products, that's really where you get bit on the whole thing.
Yes.
That makes sense now, so.
We also encountered that with Corella.
Yeah, that one's set for 15,
Long
20,
time.
yeah.
Right.
Campbell Street, set for 30.
What's that other one out there behind?
The Ivy.
Ivy. It's
Yeah,
set for a long
yeah,
time.
Ivy set for,
Most of it
that was 20, 25, 30 years sitting there. And the big thing, we changed
our ordinances on who's paying for water, who's paying for electric, and if we don't make them, streets and.
But those could be sunset separately from the plat sunsetting. It's a matter of how you write the ordinance.
And if nothing changes in the plat other than to resubmit, I mean, if the cost of the developer is
Minimal.
it minimal?
Sometimes, not always.
Well, his material costs will go up too, but that's
Well,
a decision he's made in advance.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's part of that's part of the cost of.
I mean, if you want to sunset where the cost of these transformers or where, you know, the city is no longer going to supply the water line or something like that, that can be done. That doesn't have to take away from the preliminary plat still being in place. That can be dealt with it separately. I don't think this is the best place to do this.
I mean, the other thing we could do is tell it to them, instead of it being based on the preliminary, they don't start. I mean,
Right.
they're sitting 5, 10, 25 years, well, if you don't start within that 5-year period, we just rewrite it that they have to submit the process again, the preliminary plat becomes null and void at that point.
Well, and that is what it is, yes. I mean, that's what
The
this
developer
is.
needs to get hit one way or the other. If they're gonna drag their feet, then they need to get hit.
Yeah.
I'm on that side of the fence, and I don't ever like to get hit, but if I drag my feet that long, I deserve to pay for it again.
Well, and that's why I say, we can deal with the cost of this separately from sunsetting the plat itself. I don't see why those can't be divorced from each other. I don't have a problem with, there being a sunset provision on the city supplying certain things that now we've changed the ordinance on everything for. But I don't think that should take away the preliminary plat itself and say the preliminary plat's no good.
I don't think we're saying it's no good, it's just, you haven't done anything for so long, we're gonna relook at it and make sure we're still happy with it. I mean, if you haven't started work, like Brian said, if you're sitting for 5 years, I mean, you're out of luck, you're gonna have to start over.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, with Southwest Country Estates and some of the others that were done, when we hit 2008 and had the recession, it was years before anything further was done.
Oh, yeah. I
Do we
know.
have anything written into them based on extreme economic circumstances? Like, is there anything built into any of it?
I don't know how you would add it.
I don't even know how you would, I don't know how you would define it, but I'm just asking, is there, it's pretty cut and dry.
Ron suggests there are other ways around it. The trouble is, I don't know any off the top of my head. Can you do one of the city manager's listserv queries and see if anybody else out there has a way of addressing that?
I mean, the other thought is, well, if the preliminary plat's good, if you don't, you can still hold the 5 years of the final plat, but we add in language where there has to be a trigger, like the construction has to start at a certain point, or your preliminary plat's gonna be null and void after a certain amount of time. It's almost like we need additional language for the fact that they're in the process, then they need the extra time to get their work done. If they're not gonna start the process, then we cut their legs out from underneath them. I mean, we spend billions of dollars every year on
So your
this kind of stuff,
suggestion is to change the language of the existing, we can leave the 5 year, but then change the language
change the
such
language,
that
at
it's.
least if they're making,
That
somehow,
it's-
Cindy would be better at the wording of that.
Right.
Right, but that
So-
they have to make progress, break ground somehow or something.
Some attempt moving forward with their preliminary plat, or the preliminary becomes null and void at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, and Lynn, what exactly do you want me to ask to make sure I get this right?
Let me write it up for you later.
That'll work.
Now, we got a grandfather, North Point.
What do you mean?
Don't think they're good. 5 years from now, I think they're still gonna be planting out segments of that subdivision.
So
So that's exactly
his,
the poster child.
the final plat is done for this thing he's done.
Right.
North of that, he is planning on putting more in, but we don't even have a sketch plat for that yet.
Okay.
Right. On the North Point subdivision?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, here's what I see as looking at it from the developer side and from the surveyor side. you know, Southwest Country Estates, we were better off platting the whole thing as a preliminary plat rather than piecemealing it. We could have only done part of it. But because of the flatness of the ground and the grades with the sewer lines and the streets out there, we wanted to develop the whole thing, you know, get a concept in place for that whole thing at once. Otherwise, what's gonna happen is you're gonna piecemeal these things, and if you don't plan far enough ahead, you'll run into obstacles where you can't do it. The city is better off if they can look at the whole thing at once.
Well, in the case of some subdivisions, you need to start access off of one direction and bring sewer and water and stuff from another direction.
So you
So
really
have
need
to have
to,
a preliminary plat.
right, so you really need to look at the whole thing. I mean, you can bring the sewer line across vacant ground, but what's the concept for the whole thing? And there's no requirement that we do a preliminary plat on all of the property that they own. So what we'll do is we'll piecemeal it like we do with the final plats. Southwest Country Estates was either 6 or 7 subdivision plats before it was completed, final plats. But there was one preliminary plat. The city has a better idea of what's going on and what's planned for the future if you look at the whole thing. Otherwise, we're just gonna plat the portion that is, that's gonna be final platted right now. Because why should we worry about this sunset otherwise? We'll just do this final plat for this, preliminary plat on this portion, we'll final plat it, and we'll worry about the next portion later on. But it causes poor planning in the long run.
Well, I agree, it needs to be master planned for sure. That's the hard part, is like there is your preliminary plat's in, so that's why I was saying the language has gotta be somewhere in there where, in that case, you're gonna have 6 final plats for one preliminary plat. So at least if they're making the attempt to get to the end, we gotta protect it. If they're not making the attempt, then it's their own fault.
Right.
I mean,
And if there needs to be a sunset on the city supplying certain things because the ordinances have changed and we're no longer supplying the water lines, I don't have a problem with that. I just don't think the preliminary plat should go away because of it. I think that's a bad idea.
So to,
Well,
And just to reiterate, this is strictly work session, we're not
Yeah.
making any
Sure.
decisions
Yeah.
tonight.
I'm trying to
We can
think.
Go back and,
if you have a preliminary plat for a segment, now, at some point, the procedure is sketch plat, preliminary plat, improvement plans, final plat. And do we gain anything by insisting that all the improvements be in or guaranteed within a certain fixed period of time? That puts the developer's finances kind of out there. He gets very committed.
Well, I mean, for instance, right now, we've got Mystic Ridge Plat 2 out there. There's a final plat on it. No dirt's been turned, and nothing has been done. We've been looking all year, everybody's been talking about a recession. You didn't want to start this in the middle of a recession and then have all those interest costs for all the construction that was gonna be out there. It may not happen this year,
but he's got the final plat done.
but he's got the final plat done, yes. But it has not been approved. So does that sunset after 5 years? And we have to start the process again?
He hasn't turned dirt? Possibly.
And I don't think it's gonna take you 5 years to do this next phase.
No.
But, you know, he hasn't done it this year because of the potential for a recession. That's a lot of money to hang out there and then find out you can't sell any lots.
And I think that a broad recession is a whole different issue from what the housing industry is going through right now with mortgage rates and
Yep.
availability of mortgages. I go to Rotary and the client keeps talking about how quickly the lot properties are turning over and selling around here, as if there isn't really a bad market.
Not for this
But
area.
I don't have a way of gauging it.
Right.
There's still a shortage drastically.
Yeah.
Well, there is, but I mean, my client doesn't wanna put in $500,000 worth of infrastructure right now with a possible recession coming.
One thing I might suggest is, we're talking about multiple phases, we might insist that that 5-year limit attached to the tail end of the preceding phase that has been completed and final platted. Mystic Ridge builds phase 2. Puts it all in, and he's trying to gauge how well they're selling before he commits to phase 3. And that might take, maybe not 5 years, but give him an extra 3 or something like that. Does that make sense to you, Don?
Yes, that makes more sense.
And that's a change in that particular section, but it just adds extra language.
That's where I'm at with it. I think we can handle it with some additional language as long as they're making the attempt. I have no problem letting 5 years keep going 5 years, as long as they're making the attempt in the process.
To keep moving.
To,
Yeah, see, you gotta have a time.
There's gotta be some
Like Misty,
window.
they did the first one and then set for
Well, yeah,
15
we
years.
don't want that.
Yeah, so you gotta have a time limit, or we're just,
Right.
And it's all
yeah.
completely the city's problem with materials for concrete, asphalt, sewer lines.
Can it be addressed in a different way, though? As far as the city's responsibility, you know, if something changes in that time period, is there something we can do differently to address that?
Well,
And
I,
still leave the 5 years,
I think, yes, I think other language could be added in there that would take care of it.
like a, you know,
As a side issue, we say you have to put in improvements and or guarantee them.
right,
And if you guarantee them by prices fixed and agreed to by the city under current conditions, the city gets hung out to dry if it takes a long time to fill that
Fix.
out, and the prices and all that stuff get beyond what the guarantee is.
is that, and that's all the
That-
improvements piece of the,
that language needs to be said, because we need to deal with that on development now, where there's inflationary
Right.
provisions in the process that, hey, we're bonded to this point, but if
But it
we take
expires
our,
after-
if it expires, we start on the hook for the remainder of that cost because of material
you
prices.
have to, you know, requote, I mean, basically
Yeah.
it's getting a requote, I mean, that's in any industry, really. I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't try to have language that would be any different here. If we could build that in, then,
Because then
They're
it
not
caps the
hung out to
municipality
dry.
to a point where they don't have, where they're not having to foot the bill for the extra
That's
inflation.
for sure. If there is no inflation, the city isn't gonna make a profit or gain anything. All the upside is on the developer as well as some of the downside, but the city shares some of the downside. Depends on how starved you are for growth,
right.
are we?
No.
I see that you're making good storm sewer progress. Are you renting the Traco too, or are you renting the truck with a tractor?
No,
They're really big?
me,
Okay,
I run that.
good. I remember you were here. I remember somebody, not you, who put one in a creek.
That wasn't me. There'd be a,
There's not a creek deep enough right now to bury a track of.
We had to cross the creek and he was digging and it just tipped over and all of a sudden the engine block was underwater.
that was not me. I can tell you exactly who that was.
So for this, so where are we on this? We're gonna look at revising the language.
Yeah. So see if staff could see if they could come up with something that progresses towards what Don has objected to and they can still find some semblance of protection for the city.
Mhm. So we wanna keep it, try to keep it at 5 years, but some progress has to be made in that 5 years. And then if there's multiple preliminary plats, it goes from plat
No,
to plat, 5
multiple.
years.
Multiple final plats.
Yeah, so
Multiple
it's some
final
language for phased
Right.
planning, final
Okay.
planning.
So 5 years for each of those.
I mean, with
just
small towns,
starts
you gotta
to be-
realize, development doesn't happen like in Columbia. They plat 40 acres and they put up houses on 40 acres.
Yeah.
Right.
That doesn't happen around here.
You might incorporate a phrase about preliminary plats have to include a certain percentage of the total area being sketch platted.
Oh, the
I mean,
entire.
you don't want people submitting a 2-lot preliminary plat and another 2-lot preliminary plat, just,
Well, final plat, you mean.
well, either.
Yeah, well, yes.
Right. You can game the system, that just,
And no, we don't want that.
Not at all.
Okay.
Is that all of the 5 and 6?
And then with, no, that's just this first main section. But, sorry.
I feel like there's a lot of discussion, so I'm like, I feel like there's 3 bullet
I was a
points
little worried
here.
that tonight would be a little long, so, but, so are you wanting me to put anything in there about the sunsetting of certain clauses or the inflation clause you guys are talking about?
I don't have a problem putting an inflationary clause in there.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else doesn't already have one written in there.
So it's no different than when they started adding fuel surcharges there
Exactly.
a few years ago, or however many years ago now.
Well, just to cover us on all the utilities we're installing.
Well, yes.
Okay,
If we
got it.
give them a quote and then it comes in and we're 50,000 short and have to eat it, that's not good.
Okay, so I had in here, section 30, 1 through 13, subsection E. That was where we had talked about adding in for the developer to, I think this was my original printout when I added an extra section. Can you that, please? Okay. Yeah. So,
I'm not sure what
we would want to change subsection E to read, for the, instead of just the installation of water mains and fire hydrants, we would change it to, what Sydney has requested that we change it, or suggested to be considered, to be that, the developer would, payment for materials for the installation of the water and sewer, I guess sewer
They put their own sewer
somewhere else,
in.
so
Yeah,
sewer's
sewer.
up here in
So
A, so it would just
developer
be
would
just water.
The water.
the water infrastructure and electric infrastructure or reimbursement to the city for the cost of such materials. So that's the wording that we would change, instead of it being specifically water mains and fire hydrants, it would be water infrastructure and electrical infrastructure,
that's the one that's gonna hit.
yeah.
Yeah, that was.
And refresh my memory, did we, this was not in place at the time we approved the sketch plat on Mystic Ridge.
Correct.
That's correct.
It was
That was
not-
grandfathered in.
And if we make a change to add electric, then we would grandfather, I guess it's all about the sketch plan. I just want to make sure that we're not changing the rules of the game for developers that are in progress.
Right,
I don't
so,
think I don't think we were.
No, Mystic, I think Mystic,
Mystic
we decided
was-
Mystic was the
The
cutoff
That was the
on
last
that
one.
change,
So,
because he had already had stuff in place.
so the developers, Darren, put in for North Point, he put in the water line or paid for it?
yes,
Yes.
and they will on Mystic as well. We agreed to pay for the water.
Okay.
But they
It's
haven't on
not
electric.
electric.
Electric, we never did.
We're wanting to
And
add
and I
electric.
would suggest for right now, I know it's gonna hurt us, but
Yeah.
we continue that. And the next subdivision comes through.
So the change we're proposing to make on this is that the developer will pay for the labor as well as the,
No,
No, just
Just
the material.
materials.
just materials, okay.
But
Yeah,
instead of being specific, it's more, it's all encompassing when you say the water
Structure
and
and electric.
Exactly,
Yeah.
so it's not specified exactly, so you can't come by and say, well, just a fire hydrant, right? So, it's
Yeah.
anything water or electric related material wise, right?
Yes.
So,
Hang up anyway.
and then Lynn, you're saying from the next subdivision that's forward, right? So anything that's already in place now wouldn't be affected by it.
Infrastructure to include meters?
Well, you pay separately for meters anyway, don't you?
yeah, so part of the reason why we did this is because whenever the first, it was out on Addy, I think, there was a discrepancy on when they came in to get their building permit, if they had to pay for a water tap fee or not. So with us just saying water infrastructure, if the developer has already paid for that tap, we do not charge a new water tap fee when the builder comes in. So that just kind of helps clear it up whenever it gets to that point.
Anybody have anything else?
I don't have any issue with Sydney's language.
Yeah. Okay. Good there.
Out of curiosity, is there even a surplus of developers or having contractors available to go out and run long stretches of electric?
Not right now, there's not a surplus. Give it 6 months, there might be,
If this stuff will get away, I mean,
yeah.
paying for it, but you could be lucky to have the city people put in for
They always have.
it, always. Well, that's an advantage that we have.
Right. That's kind of what we discussed is if we're gonna implement that, and the city kind of helps with installation, so.
Do you wanna
Excuse
have
me.
Sydney prepare an ordinance for that change, or wait until she can put all those together as one ordinance?
What?
We're talking about one for the 5-year, which will need to be brought back to us.
Correct.
This one is more or less settled. You could go do an ordinance, but is there a need to do it right away and get it on the books? Independent of the other
So-
changes we want to make to the subdivision
We
regulations.
have to have public hearings to change anything in the subdivision code. So we're gonna have to have another meeting to do all of this anyway, to have the public hearing. And then you guys will make motions on what you want to make a recommendation to the board. So I just figured we'd do it all at once. And
That's,
then,
that's the question.
okay. Okay, so. My computer's already doing anything. So 30, 1 through 16 subsection D, that's the one that has to deal with, the roads that the developers are putting in. Currently, a developer will put in a road and the city, will take, ownership of the road after 1 year. After discussing with, city staff and Sydney, a lot of cities have gone to 2 years. Some of them are more, but, so we were looking at seeing if you guys would consider 2 years.
So basically then the city takes
From the
responsibility.
street
after
side
2
of
years.
after a year is when, a year and a half is when you start seeing damage. I mean, a 2-year would be should be at least a minimum. They should warranty it. And their fault, I mean, we've had some subdivisions, I mean, year and a half, 2 years, we're rebuilding them.
Well, some of those were pretty shoddy construction to begin with.
Well, I mean, this
I-
puts
I think that's the
this
issue
puts the
with parking.
pressure back,
Yeah.
this puts the pressure back on the
But I
developer
can
to
give
not
you a
allow
list of
shoddy
subdivisions,
construction.
not just
Yeah.
one.
That'd be where I would be, is not, require all the necessary third-party inspections and process
Right.
through.
Right.
And then that won't happen, it'll last more than a year.
If you do the inspections and you do the concrete testing, the stuff that's supposed to be done, you're gonna not have the problem within 2 years.
then there shouldn't be an issue if we extend it to 2 years.
No, I mean, I really don't have an issue with the
The
extending.
problem comes is no contractor is gonna, other than their labor, is gonna eat it. Cause they're gonna they'll be forced to eat the material, no supplier is gonna warranty the material for 2 years. So if you put in 1,000 foot of street, that developer's out, you know, $600,000 in a street that they can't recoup. Most people, especially in a small town, can't accommodate that.
Okay.
So we've gotta
If
figure
they
out.
don't do it, then that's
So-
1,000 foot of street the city can't do elsewhere, that it already has a
But
responsibility.
if you
for.
require them to do the $15,000 or $20,000 in testing in the process and reject the bad concrete,
Right.
then the street's gonna be there for 20 years.
Yeah,
I
and I
mean-
think that's more
That's
so
where I'm
what
at.
we're leaning to is, we need to put something in place to protect the city.
I thought we had something
Well-
in place to inspections, because we've talked about this before. Is we've added rock to it, because you used to be able to just peel the grass off and throw it on the dirt.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, and then we've talked about it,
We
but
had
I,
problems with, and
We're gonna talk about that.
according to our standard,
Okay,
had enough
thank you.
base rock underneath it.
Right, we added base rock.
we added base rock not too long ago. And I
But,
thought we added testing to it
Matt,
too.
are you still working on the center
That's when
standards?
cobblestone started out there, and
Where are we?
I thought we added
So we've
testing
got
to it.
ES&S is assisting us with some of their
I
stuff.
don't know
Uh,
if we settled.
Well, that's
who
why
was
we
gonna
want
pay
you guys
for all
here.
that, though, did we?
If I think.
Any
Are we doing that
suggestions
on
that
the
we want to
developer?
implement
I thought so.
is kind of why we're doing
I
it.
mean, I'm gonna
That's,
tell you
we
that
need to make sure of that, but yeah.
the problems I've seen with, the streets in this town are, there's two different problems. One street was put in and it wasn't even, there isn't even 6 inches of concrete in places out there on that street. And it started falling apart after a number of years. Even though there wasn't any houses on the end of the street, it started falling apart because there just wasn't enough concrete in the first place. The second problem I see is that a lot of the streets get poured very wet because it's much easier to drag it off when you do that. Wet concrete decreases your ultimate strength of your concrete drastically.
But that's why the third party inspection is
So-
so critical, and even if there's a third, just like we have the city has another engineer that they refer back to for other things, there should be a third party testing agency that if the developer isn't gonna hire one and have somebody monitor at all the steps of the process, then that third party's out there rejecting concrete for being too wet, slumps too high, whatever.
Right.
And the city's protected at the developer's expense.
I mean, concrete for a street shouldn't be poured at any more than about a 2.5 to 3 inch slump.
Be fun to work.
I think me and Linda will disagree with you on that.
Yeah,
Well, I'm gonna tell you, I know what it does when you get wet concrete in there and it starts cracking. You get all these shrinkage cracks from that.
You're gonna have air
Your-
pockets
your
in
strength-
slump.
yeah,
You're
probably
supposed to
not.
vibrate it. It doesn't take that much. I've worked construction. I know what it's like. That stuff can be vibrated. It doesn't take much to do it.
Does, the city entered into a contract with the consulting engineer after I was long gone. Some year when they actually had money. And did that contract include doing things like testing and all of that? Or
I don't know. I don't know. I can look into it.
I know we currently do not have,
nobody inspects it other
nobody,
than.
other than
department heads?
myself and Phil, when they call and they're pouring, I mean, that's,
If we know.
yeah, and that's when they call, oh, yeah, we poured this stretch.
Yeah.
And we get out there, so.
For the purposes of tonight,
Right.
I don't have any problem with 2 years. But that might be something to look into, either with the consulting engineer or requiring the developer to hire and designate an inspecting engineer, a qualified inspecting engineer to perform standard tests. Well,
I thought it was already in.
I thought, Lena's right, I thought we had put that in there when we talked about base rock and
Yeah.
everything
No.
else.
Because we don't have any standards on the streets.
Yeah, we need to test the concrete, the base rock's one.
Well,
thing.
not much.
And most of these subdivisions, of course, of the testing for a subdivision isn't gonna, I mean, if you can build a $1 million subdivision, you could afford $15,000, $20,000
I mean-
testing.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, you don't necessarily have to hire an engineer, an engineering firm to do the testing. You can take the cylinders, you can do the slump test, city personnel can do that. It's not
We
hard
ain't
to
putting
learn
that
how to
on
do
us.
that.
We
No.
ain't putting that on us.
No,
Well, I mean, from a liability standpoint, I would think that the city.
Oh, from a liability
That would
standpoint,
be
you're
it.
better off with the engineer.
Exactly, I mean, I
But,
think.
but
that-
engineers cost money when you do that too, so you have to put the cost onto the developer.
Well, absolutely, and I
That's-
think the
they
developer
should
should
be
pay the cost of
responsible.
it.
It's, they're doing the street, they need to be
Exactly.
responsible for it.
I mean,
But I mean, I've done more than one slump test in the time that I worked construction, and I've done a lot more than one cylinder.
because at
As,
the end of the
as
day,
long, as long as we develop a standard that says a minimum slump, a minimum compact,
right,
PSI strength, all those things, wetness, whatever, and they require them to hire a third-party inspector, we will never be liable for a street. A street will last for, especially a concrete street, will last a long time.
Yes.
We haven't had a concrete street last 5 years.
Which is terrible. And
That's poor quality construction.
And it's not the whole street. They have spots here, spots there, but
so I don't think we have a problem with the 2 year, I do think that there's, other things that need to be put in place,
Yeah.
right? That we consider,
And you're gonna get spalling and cracking. I mean, concrete's designed to crack. We all know that.
it's gonna do two things, get harder.
It's gonna break and nobody's gonna steal it.
Right. So, as long as it's met a design standard and
Right.
tested, it will crack, but it will crack where it's supposed to crack.
and
Yes.
still be there.
Usually.
It'll still be there.
Well, I mean, we should have standards, and we should, I mean, we can be pro-development, in my opinion, we can be pro-development, but we should be left with quality constructed streets when it's done. And that should be at the developer's expense.
But,
Yeah,
So they're the ones
yeah,
making money on it.
and
Yeah.
someone that's lived here, I mean, granted, I know there's others that live here longer than I have, but I've driven past some of these streets being poured, and I've seen the quality of the personnel pouring the street, and I know they're not tested, and I know they're not meeting the proper concrete requirements to pour a street. It should be a city standard.
And those are your streets that you have. to
And those are the
follow.
streets that I guarantee that the street department's
So-
having problems with.
All right.
So are you gonna make all that, what about patching? When they dig in the street, the sewer line and all
Right.
that, are they
Yeah, we
gonna have to
wanna-
have that tested and all that?
Yeah, and as you start getting into, and that's the thing is that we're in a
I
domino
think you
effect.
have to put
Yeah.
the,
I mean,
Yeah, no, I think there needs to be some,
so,
New specs
so,
on a street cut.
so your house, you gotta dig out the street, fix your sewer line,
Mm-hmm.
you gotta hire an engineer to come in and do a slump test on your concrete?
maybe you can scale it down on a street patch. I mean, you can still have a set of standards and something that we can, maybe the city staff can be a part of
Yeah.
inspecting. But when it comes to full roads,
I think
it's
you
just a
just-
different ballgame.
you
Yeah.
just have
Yeah.
to be very clear in the language, because
Yeah.
you're right, because that's a very
Yeah,
good point.
we don't need to turn the patch into a major project for a homeowner.
Yeah, cause I mean, that's
Yeah.
gonna get in the city's pocket, because
Yeah.
then we're gonna do
Right.
street patches, and we're gonna have all that.
Right,
Well, you know,
maybe it's the size of,
Yeah, have a
scale,
size
scale
that,
of the size.
you don't want soup coming out for a patch.
No.
I mean, you can look at the concrete.
Depends how
and
hot
you
it is.
can- You can tell what the slump is by
It gets
looking
wetter,
at
it gets a little
the
wetter, don't it?
Yeah. Depends how hot it is, Don.
But yeah, I agree that you could easily scale that. There's 2 paragraphs in there that up to a certain amount of square feet of patching or lineal feet of footage of street.
And the big thing, like Matt said, is just, we don't even know half the time. That's the thing to run into.
And,
Honestly,
I mean, it shouldn't, we should know, right? Like,
Yeah,
shouldn't there be
honestly,
something submitted to
Does it-
say that this is starting? Like, I don't-
Is there a permit process for street,
cuts.
for
Yes.
street cuts? Then,
I mean,
if
it's a
they-
very-
if
it's a
they
very
don't have a
vague.
permit,
Yeah,
then it's their
very vague.
responsibility to prove that it meets the requirements.
Yeah.
And realistically, if they pour a street without it being inspected by city staff, they ought to be made pour tear it out.
Yes.
Right then and there.
I agree.
We've had made a few tear them out
Yeah.
that were just horrible pours.
Yeah.
I mean, it looked like a blind man finished it. I mean, it was bad.
I mean, when if they don't get the permit, then they're responsible for everything. And if they have to tear it back out and do it right the next time, they won't do it again.
No better way to learn than have to
That's,
redo it.
Yeah.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, exactly, so, so is there anything else we wanna add to this? I mean, I think we're we're okay with 2 years, but there's a lot of other language here that.
You can add
We
it
need to look at.
to just the permitting language, if nothing else.
Right. So,
Okay, are we ready to move on to chapter 30, sections 12 and 15?
I think so.
Okay.
So that'd be item 7 on the agenda. That's what's hard to
So this, sections 12 and 13 deal with roads. So it's 2.5 pages. So that's all we have, for specs on the roads. That's backfilling, the removal of excavated materials, and permitting and requirements. So, we've looked at, and I might want Matthew and Phil to kind of talk about this a bit. And look at that in a little bit. I don't know, but we've looked at Columbia's, code and what they have. It's,
Cumbersome.
yes?
Yes.
Like I don't
Very
understand most of
cumbersome.
it.
Yes.
Thank you, because
But we definitely need to work on ours, and I don't know that we'll get it all done in 1 or even 2 sessions of talking about it. We do have an engineer who's willing to work with us on our, on this section of our ordinance, and he said that he would attend one of our planning and zoning meetings if you guys would want to. It's one of our on-call engineers with ESNS.
That gonna cost us?
Well, I'm sure it would.
it'll come free.
Considering the insurance costs when something goes
Right.
wrong, it's worth it. But, like, we don't have anything in our ordinances for, requirements for alleys, for example. So if someone works in an alley, they can backfill with whatever they want to, because we have nothing in our ordinance that says what they have to do.
Well, most of them are rock anyway, so it doesn't make much difference.
Well, they backfill with mud there, and, yeah, whatever's there, and then we're stuck adding rock to it for months.
Well, that's a matter of compaction though. That's-
Well, we've done that on occasion too.
I mean, if they're not gonna compact it, they should fill it rock.
Yeah. But when they do it on a weekend, after hours, you don't have a clue.
They can tear it out.
Good luck.
So the enforcement don't have
So
a
the
problem.
landowner
Cell
does-
phones at least make progress pictures to show you what they did.
So we do have a section here for emergency or after hours.
That happens a lot.
But I mean, if you guys start adding rock, then I think that the landowner ought to get a bill.
They'll get it out of their contractor real quick, if they get it.
But if it has to happen on a weekend or after hours or as an emergency, they're supposed to contact the police department, let them know what's going on. And then they're not supposed to do any final surfacing or temporary patches, until me or Matthew or Phil can come and inspect it and approve the backfill and issue a permit. That's currently what's in our.
And that's for the alleys, right?
No, that's not for alley, that's just for,
Any street.
yeah.
I don't think it's too far a stretch to put that for alleys also.
No.
Yeah, it
Public
covers.
right away.
Yeah, they both, yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Public
It-
right
it's
away.
public right of way, alleys and streets should essentially be dealt with the same way. Admittedly, our alleys aren't quite up to street standards for the most part, but they should be dealt with in the same manner.
Some of them are drag strips. See people fly down them.
I put speed bumps in.
The old part of town is where we have alleys, and that's where we also have the deepest sewer lines.
Mhm.
Tell me about it. We had to repair one. It's like 8 feet deep.
Well, that's pretty shallow.
That's pretty shallow.
15 or 16 16 feet and then
So,
you didn't rip
I don't know, I can't remember, you were there, you saw us out there.
Then you run into
Like,
it.
Yeah, it's like-
Can't find a contractor
Yeah.
locally.
Back there.
8 to 10 feet deep, you know.
But yes, we had discussed that we think that having a third party in here to check and do the testing on the concrete when we've got major road repairs going on or roads going in, would be, for the best.
And that would go in this section when it was rewritten.
Yes. Now, does the subdivision code reference this? Or does the developer's requirements in the subdivision code reference these road requirements? Or do we need to add that language to the subdivision?
That they have to meet
Well,
these standard requirements.
I don't think that that's in most standards. If you have a separate public, or street standard, that's a standalone document. It doesn't necessarily have to be referred to by the, in the subdivision regs for it to be in effect.
It
It's
does
a
not.
separate
It
standard.
becomes part of the permit application.
Yes.
They have to meet the city code
City-
of that
city-
section
Okay,
by putting in a subdivision.
Yeah, like
So
we're doing one now over by Kansas City, and they have a line that says, has to be, all streets have to be constructed to the city's design construction manual.
Right.
okay.
And it's like that thick, so
Yeah,
we gotta meet whatever they say,
it's a boring read.
yeah.
But I mean, we should have a set of sewer standards, a set of stormwater standards, a set of street standards. They're all standalone standards.
We sort of have
But-
that, don't we? There should be a document that lists
what those are.
the minimum standards for street cross sections and sewer lines.
That's not the same thing as the standards that you get from Columbia or some of these other bigger towns. We need something more like what they have.
More robust.
Maybe not quite so bad as what they have.
Yeah, let's take a couple steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need something that's got a little teeth in it.
But yes, we need something with teeth in it that talks about, more than just the cross section. That's the least of the problems.
By the way, section 30 is not part of planning and zoning. It does not require a public hearing and can be taken directly to the board whenever you decide you have something involved.
Right, but I figure this one's gonna take a little bit to construct, cause I'm not certain on what all needs to go in here and how we want it to look. I know we don't wanna go exactly what Columbia's got, but just.
No, we don't need that
change.
much. I'll say Matt and I read through that, and that's like way more than we need.
And you pay that around the clock personnel too.
But just going from what we currently have to something better is what we just need to work on to get it. Just need some direction from you guys to know where and what to put in there, and then I'm gonna get with Sydney and so we can rewrite this whole section of the ordinance.
One advantages of Sydney is that she works, or her firm works with several different cities and counties, and therefore, there's somewhere along the line, some of them are more in what we want than what Columbia requires.
Right.
More in line with
And that'd
the
be a
size of
question
town.
there of the listing of all the municipalities that they represent. Can we look via maps, hey, what's close to the size of the
Do a
town?
comparison, size of town, population, size of town
Yeah,
comparison.
and then see how that compares, and then we can go up or down from there.
So do you want me to ask Sydney to get us some examples?
Yeah,
Yeah, she would.
definitely.
Yep, okay, I can do that.
I mean, if you consider Columbia kind of the gold standard, then what do these other things municipalities have? And what parts of the Columbia gold standard can we leave out?
Yeah. There's plenty.
Ask Moberly or Mexico or.
Right.
There's plenty to leave out, no doubt.
Mexico, have you go to those streets? Oh, we can go to that.
Probably.
I
She
can
might
tell you
send-
that
send
Moberly's
one
aren't
over
great
and
either,
that-
because whoever did their
That'd
latest
be great
repair
for
on
us.
Willows.
Yeah.
Moberly or
Right, Sturgis.
Just horrible.
I mean, you can look at
Check
Boone
Sturgis
County
goes.
standards too, but they have rock roads,
Yeah.
and we don't want that standard.
Right.
Right.
Thompson.
Clark's are people.
Yeah. Clark and Thompson, we're gonna compare to.
There we go.
We'll be all right.
I'm sure your developers will love you.
Higby,
Smile when you say Thompson.
throw Higby in that mix too. Get some good.
Somebody can move to.
Is there anything you wanted to add or?
No, I mean, I think if we just get a, kind of a copy from somebody else and see what we can pull out of there, implement it in ours to kind of protect the infrastructure a little bit more.
Kurt, just having the core or something.
And then you got a note that we need to
He's
update
gonna
our
concrete that.
permitting and stuff
Never
for
do
the
the
street
slopes
cuts.
and they're doing
Is
area
there any other
drainage.
permitting that we should
He's
look
in the
at
fiber and
updating? You guys-
So, it can be done.
No, cause that would, the street cuts were kind of what we were talking about earlier, but just maybe implement a few more inspection points in there, so Phil or I, or
Yeah.
somebody on the crew can
Because it's easier.
be more involved other than
Is there
them
anything
calling us
about
and the truck leaving and
sidewalks in there, like when the plumber has to dig through a sidewalk?
to replace it back.
Yeah, is there something in there about that?
You mean just taking it out of the chunk and laying it back on top of the dirt is not.
Well, so you get-
That's not exactly the most desirable way of taking care
Yeah,
of it.
that's what we do, fold it over and fold it back, as long as it didn't break.
Well, if it's level, that's fine.
Still talking Thompson, or are we trying to get?
No, I was sturdy, I was there sturdy.
So you're gonna look at the sidewalk?
Well, I mean, even putting it back. you know?
Yes,
Putting it back in general?
Yeah, there's some that have been tore out, they just throw it in some rock and. If they get it back in there, look, hey, we've done that.
Well, I was asked one time, they poured some curb.
We built a whole sidewalk.
And then they had to remove the curb because it didn't work according to the, I mean, it wasn't gonna work, it was gonna trap water behind it.
Yeah.
And I was asked, can we move that curb to another part of town where we don't have curb? And it's like, probably not.
I mean, the same problem.
But that would go under excavation in public right of way if somebody's doing something.
It should be under there,
Yeah.
yes. I'm not even sure that ADA wouldn't apply on some of that.
Be careful.
Alright,
Yep. Moving on.
so anything else from number 7 on the chapter 30? Alright, as may arise, anybody have anything else to bring to the table? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I don't think so.
Wait,